What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today I'm going to be sharing a handful of tips to help you reduce your recoil, or at least in some of these cases, significantly reduce the amount of visual recoil you experience in Battlefield 6. Now with these tips, many of you will likely already be well aware of them. However, based on a lot of comments I've been seeing lately, it's clear that many people have no idea about these things, so I figured it was worth making a video here. And with those comments I'm referring to, I've been seeing a surprising number of cheating accusations from people watching my gameplays on YouTube, which I do find to be quite funny because I'm nowhere near a top Battlefield player by any means. However, a common type of comment I've been seeing is, how does your gun have literally no recoil? Or, this guy's definitely using a Cronus or a Zim or some other form of a cheat to get zero recoil on his gun. So today, I wanted to explain the combination of factors that allow me to do this and make it look like I often have little to no recoil when firing my gun. This is actually due to a combination of several factors, and none of them involve any form of cheating, and several of them are things you can make quick adjustments to without requiring any form of skill or talent at all. So let's dive right into this with probably the main one. This is field of view. As I've explained many times on the channel, while changing your field of view doesn't actually impact any of the in-game performance stats, it's not actually reducing the amount of recoil you experience or anything like that, the change in perspective with FOV can actually make a big difference in a few different ways. So quick recap here, if you have a very low FOV, this means you're going to be zoomed in a lot more, and the benefits here are your targets are going to appear larger on your screen, so especially at a distance, it is going to be easier to spot and perhaps track targets. However, the downside there is, of course, a loss of peripheral vision, so you can't really see as much going on around you because you've got sort of that tunnel vision now. On the flip side, when you have a very high FOV, the obvious benefit is you gain peripheral vision, so you can see more of what's going on around you, but that comes at the cost of targets appearing smaller at a distance, making it a bit harder to spot enemies at a distance, especially if all you can see is like their head, for instance. Now, those are just the obvious benefits, though. Some additional benefits that are less obvious to many when it comes to using a higher FOV is, first off, it feels like you're moving so much faster. And that's another form of comment that I have been seeing here or there as well, is how do you move so fast in the game? When I move, I feel like I'm running in mud, but I watch your gameplay and it looks like you're zipping around like crazy. How are you doing that? Well, this is almost definitely just due to the fact that I play on a bit of a higher FOV. I don't have it maxed out or anything. I play on a 105 FOV. I feel like that's a nice balance, but obviously it does come down to preference, at least to some degree. However, a more important additional benefit of playing with a higher FOV that's more relevant to this specific topic is any form of movement, in this case due to the recoil of your gun, it's going to be less pronounced the higher your field of view is. And again, that's just the basics of how perspective works. If you're looking down a really high zoom scope, for instance, and you look up or down 5 degrees, the amount of movement you see relative to the objects you're looking at a distance is going to appear significantly higher than if you weren't using any magnification at all, looking at the same objects at the same distance. And keep in mind, this not only applies to your FOV setting in game, this also applies to the magnification of the optic that you're using. So let's look at a couple extremes here. First, let's look at having the lowest FOV possible with a fairly high zoom optic on this gun, and look at how much movement there is when firing, especially due to that recoil. My sights are bouncing around all over the place. There's so much movement relative to my target, and it would be pretty difficult to keep track of things when firing like this. Now, let's use the exact same gun. The only adjustment I'm making here is to the optic, and then I'm also going to crank up my FOV, which I don't necessarily recommend the maximum value, but just for an example, now this is what it looks like. And as you can see, suddenly you're not seeing nearly as much bounciness. It's not nearly as pronounced, despite the fact that we've done nothing to change the actual recoil we're experiencing. Our bullets are going to be landing exactly the same in both of these situations because we're not affecting the recoil of the gun at all. However, it's very clear that visually, we're seeing far less recoil when zoomed out more and with a higher field of view value. So this is probably the biggest reason for many of these cheat accusations is people just tend to play on a lower field of view, or they tend to really like high zoom optics because they think high zoom is good. My targets will appear larger and that will make them easier to hit, right? Well, not necessarily if, from your perspective, your camera or your optic is going to be bouncing around like crazy. For me, like I said, my preference is a 105 field of view. I find that's a nice balance, and I tend to lean in the direction of very low zoom optics. In fact, my favorite optic in the game right now is literally a 1 magnification optic, or it doesn't magnify at all. And that means when I aim down sight, I actually don't zoom in at all. I just bring the gun up and there's no additional zoom there. And that really makes it look like I've got a lot less recoil than what I'm actually experiencing. However, while that's probably one of the main factors, there are a few other factors to consider here as well. In a lot of these videos where I see a bunch of these cheat accusations, it tends to be when I'm using one of the best recoil mitigating attachments on my gun. And for those that missed it, I did a whole video talking about recoil and all of the main attachments that impact our recoil in the game, so I'd highly recommend checking that out so you can see how to best mitigate your recoil. And something else you'll learn in that video is the next factor I'm going to be talking about today. This is the input that I use. This does come into play a little bit as well, because I play on a controller, and when using a controller, you immediately see a roughly 20 to 25% reduction to your recoil just by plugging in that input and using it compared to a mouse and keyboard. So that may be another contributing factor. If you're a mouse and keyboard player and you watch a controller player play, they automatically have less recoil from the get-go. However, that's largely done because it's generally easier to make fine adjustments on a mouse and keyboard, and as you can see here, I can control recoil just fine with a mouse and keyboard as well. It's not like it's that difficult, and that's why I don't think this is like one of the biggest factors, but it is a factor I wanted to at least point out here because you may not have been aware of that. And then finally, another factor that comes in here that you might not like to hear, skill does come into play at least to some degree. Now, as I said, I don't claim to be a top Battlefield player. However, I do have quite a bit of FPS experience over the past 30 years or so, and I'd like to think that I've gotten pretty good at playing FPS games. And realistically, controlling recoil in a game like Battlefield is quite basic. It's not that difficult to do. It doesn't take a crazy amount of skill to control the recoil in the game because, generally speaking, recoil isn't that much of a factor in this game, whereas spread or dispersion or bloom, that tends to play a much bigger role in your accuracy at range. But in saying this, even though it's a basic skill and it isn't that difficult to simply control your recoil by firing in short bursts, while also slightly pulling down and typically just a little bit to the left with your aim as you're firing, every time you pull the trigger and are firing, because guns tend to kick upward and a little bit to the right. While that doesn't require a whole lot of skill to do that, at the end of the day, there does tend to be a gap between a very good player controlling recoil and an average player or below average player trying to control their recoil. It is something you do have to actively work on, and you can get better at that over time, as long as you're putting a little bit of effort and focus into that. And that's it. Those are the primary factors. I know it's not some crazy advanced thing. This is more so designed for the beginners out there, especially the beginners that can't comprehend the amount of recoil they've been seeing in my videos or in other people's videos. I see the same sort of accusations thrown around when it comes to many content creators out there, when it's pretty clear in most cases that they're just following these same things that I listed today. But with that, I am curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. First off, were you guys aware of how much your field of view or magnification especially can impact the visual recoil you see? And I'm also just curious to know, what field of view do you guys play on? What feels most comfortable for you? And do you see yourself potentially making some adjustments to that going forward now that you've seen this video? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.